This is a very fascinating guy to listen to on his video blogs, and we're going to get a chance to discuss some things with him here. This is Ian Crossland. He's an experienced media director with a fascinating background, including being an actor as well as a social media network creator and a host and developer on the popular show Timcast, hosted by Poole. He's a very interesting guy to listen to, and it's a pleasure to have him join us here for the 24th hour. Ian, welcome.
Thanks for having me, man.
So we were talking right before we started recording here about we both came awake to 9/11 roughly around the same time. Most people that I talk to say they came awake around 2007 or so. Talk to us about your journey to waking up to 9/11 and other lies and becoming a quote unquote conspiracy theorist, a proud label here in 2024.
Yeah, I didn't ask you before we started. Do you care if I swear on this thing, or is this censored?
The F word. The F word.
It was fucking crazy, dude. I started making YouTube videos in 2006, like June 2006, just to get, I was like, what would Jesus do with his tech? Let's do something righteous. Let's spread the truth. Let's try and figure out what's going on. And then I started seeing these documentaries, being in that space, people would comment on my videos and send me like, hey, because I was like, I thought we were the good guys. The America was just like, yay, America. And they would send me all this crazy stuff. I ended up seeing this movie Zeitgeist, which you've probably seen. Loose Change was another one. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them, actually, I go back a little further. I worked at Ground Zero in 2001, September 5th. I moved out to New York, September 5th of 2001. 6 days later, the towers came down, and I was like, well, I guess that's what happens in New York City. It's a crazy town. And people outside the city were like, no, this is it. This is not normal. This is bigger than that. And I ended up in October of 2001 getting a temp job down there with AMEC, one of the construction companies that was doing the cleanup, one of three. And I sat in the American Express building across the street from the pile from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night, 12-hour shifts with a cop. And we were just doing security on the second floor. All the windows had been blown out of the building on the first and second floor. It was just like frigid air coming in. I didn't realize at the time the explosive damage from, the bombs planted in the building apparently had propulsed and shattered the surrounding windows. I just thought a building coming down would do that naturally. Also, I thought a building coming down would fall in its own footprint at near free fall speed without its supports being blown out. I just bought the narrative at first. So seeing these documentaries, things started to piece together. Dude, I worked at Ground Zero, and the firemen would come in off the pile, and they'd be like, bro, there's fucking molten lava under the pile. And I was like, okay, I guess that's what happens when buildings fall down. There's just molten lava. This is like months after the building came down. There was still flowing molten steel is what it was, or molten iron or whatever the fuck it was, just molten metal flowing. And he was like, they would find bodies, but they said they wouldn't find bodies. They'd find this white twizzlery substance, is how he described it, which was the remnants of bone. Everything else had melted away of the human, except if they found a fireman's jacket, they'd find the twizzlery substance inside a fireman's jacket. They knew that was the remnants of a fireman because that stuff was the jacket was heat resistant. It could handle that high temperature. And they'd wrap it in an American flag. And he's like, the bodies aren't under the pile, man. The bodies are under our feet, washing down into the East River. They're all melted. And I didn't, at the time, I was just like, I guess that's what happens when buildings fall down. But now I understand the nano-thermite seemingly had melted the steel and just caused flowing rivers of it for months afterwards. So it was these documentaries that got me turned on to all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, me too, and so many of us. And, they turned it into a meme. Jet fuel can't melt steel beams. They use this to attack us. But it doesn't change the fact. I mean, this is a documented fact that we have presented time and time again. The jet fuel fires cannot get hot enough to cause the kind of molten metal, iron, steel that we see at the World Trade Center. So where did that heat come from? Where did it come from? And we never gotten a proper accounting of it from the U.S. government. And I'm sure that you have followed our work somewhat, and other people in the 9/11 truth movement, everything that they have been doing. That we keep on, hitting a brick wall with this in many cases. We get far, we have victories here and there, but they're hard fought. And we are living in the system right now where a lie is allowed to just linger in the room like a bad smell. And I see people just kind of compromising with it, going along and saying, well, yeah, I always questioned 9/11, but what are you going to do? The government's evil and all that. And to me, it feels like it's like a spiritual war, for the heart and soul of this country, because we're having this internal conflict going on. I don't know. Do you see this in any way as a spiritual war, whether we can face the truth about what really happened on that day?
Well, it's definitely like an override of cognitive dissonance to be able to accept logic, which is like buildings don't fall in near free fall speed unless their supports are blown out ahead of time. They just they pancake and then they topple. That the buildings came down and near both building 1 and 2 fell in near and 7 fell in near free fall speed indicates that the supports have been blown out, which corroborates eyewitnesses on the ground that were actually working, like first responders, saying bombs are going off in the building. There's documentaries of it. Pop, 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 pop up the building. These explosions also, like I said earlier, the windows of the neighboring buildings getting blown out and shattered, debris being found blocks away. And so I look at logic. That's how I play this. I didn't want to think that someone had been in there planting explosives on the support beams, getting prepared for some false flag to get us into war in the Middle East. I didn't want to believe that. That's insane to think that someone would do that. But at the same time, facts are facts. The building fell in near free fall speed. Both of them did. Okay, that indicates the supports have been blown out. They found nano-thermite in the dust. I've got plenty of evidence, documentary evidence. Unfortunately, NIST, I don't even know if NIST has supplied that evidence, but it's been like external sources have recovered and found the nano-thermite, which is a military-grade incendiary used to melt steel in the dust all around the building. They shipped the stuff off to China, which isn't really evidence of anything, but within the 3 weeks after the collapse, they started shipping the metal out of there. They wanted to get rid of the evidence, the crime scene. They wanted to get rid of the evidence and not explore the evidence. That was odd. Not evidence of really, that doesn't alone doesn't mean anything, but coupled with all this other stuff. And what else do we got here? So I think the near free fall speed of the buildings and the nano-thermite in the dust were the two nails that really made me think someone had been in there getting ready to pull those buildings.
That's what's the creepiest part about it to me, is that there were people going to work probably, at least 8 months. I would guess it would take to pull this, maybe longer. There were people going to work every single day while this is going on, or if they're doing it at night, just the fact that it's happening in there, people have no idea what's coming in September, just blissfully, just going to work and doing their thing while this horrible plot is going on. Of course, those people deserve justice. And you mentioned about the nano-thermite and the dust. You know how NIST responds to that? When they're asked, did you do these same tests that the University of Denmark did, Copenhagen, Denmark did under Niels Harrit's team? They said, well, we didn't do the tests. They said they didn't find evidence of explosives, and then they're pressed and they say, well, we didn't actually look for them. So how can you find something that you are not looking for? Are you familiar with the UAF study, the University of Alaska? So AE 9/11 Truth raised money, commissioned an independent study. So that means we didn't pay for the results or anything. We just asked them if they would do the study. And they said, we're going to tell you what we really think when we do this. And Dr. Leroy Halsey, one of the engineering professors there, did a model of Building 7, tested every which way. And their final conclusion was that the only way that Building 7 could have fallen the way that it did is if the internal and external columns all failed virtually at the same time, within seconds of each other. And now the UAF report didn't go this far. They won't say what could have caused that. They just say what happened in the building. But the only way that could happen is with pre-planted explosives. So of course we tried to make a big deal out of this. All of the resources we could publicize it. Barely got any media coverage. They're afraid of this. They don't want anybody hearing that the University of Alaska has completely refuted NIST's conclusions. So it's just crazy what we go up against with the media.
It's sort of like with the JFK assassination, like the documents just haven't been released. I think they're waiting until everyone involved is dead. And then even then, maybe they're people that they're related to or that we're working with. Like there were probably like 21-year-olds involved in that in the 60s that are now in their 70s and 80s. And God knows, I don't know what the years or the ages would be. But like I cannot go so far as to claim who did it. I tend to think like Halliburton all of a sudden got this contract in Iraq. Okay. Dick Cheney was in charge of Halliburton, was his company. He was the guy that oversaw. I think he ordered a stand down of the Air Force that day, or that they run training missions beforehand. So he's got his hands in the pot, but I can't make the claim that he was involved because I don't have that evidence. I just know that someone was in there beforehand planting explosives in that building to blow out the support beams. I don't know who. But I'm like, follow the money. That's where my mind goes. Is like, well, who profited from this? And it was obviously the American military-industrial complex. It's not really an American military-industrial complex, but it's this imperial military-industrial complex that just planted in Iraq and then into Afghanistan and then into Iraq. Like how crazy the dominoes started to fall after that. And all these government agencies started getting built. Like the spy state went on steroids after that. So my mind thinks that the U.S. government is involved, but I can't claim it because I don't have the evidence.
Yeah, well, or elements of it. You know, people tend to think about countries like they're people. You know, like, oh, France like represents one guy and he's friends with this other guy, but these are all made up of individual people. And so if you have good people in government, then you got a good government. If you have bad people trying to manipulate things in an organization involved, trying to pull the strings behind the scenes and get more power for himself or put more money in his own pocket, even if there's good people there who are blissfully unaware that this is going on. And yeah, I mean, the thing is, look, we've always said here, and we've always taken the careful approach at AE that we simply want a new investigation so that we don't ever talk about complicity, even though everyone here has their own individual opinions and they pretty much match up that there had to be some kind of insider involvement in this. But the physical evidence shows this. Look, in the Twin Towers, the top block crushing the bottom portion. A top block cannot crush the lower part of a building without slowing down. All right. And there's no jolt as the top block hits the lower portion of the building. You know, you have a hammer hit a nail, what's going to happen? Even if it drives the nail through the wood, the hammer is still going to slow down. And this has been measured by Tony Zambodi. He's got a paper explaining his whole process for doing this. I mean, in the case of Building 7, I think I've mentioned this. I don't know if it was on another interview or earlier in this event, but you know, they claim that these fires in this area where they say the collapse initiated got so hot that they heated these beams. It pushed a girder off of its seat. The girder hit the floor below it, and then this caused an entire series of events inside the building where the floors collapsed, and that the interior fell first, and then the exterior fell afterwards. And that's how they try to explain why it looked like it did as it came down. The problem is that like an hour before the building came down, you can see this area that they're talking about, and the fires are burnt out. So there's no fires going on. If you don't have fires, you don't have heat. You don't have thermal expansion to cause the beams to push the girder off the seat. The comparison I make is Back to the Future. If Marty McFly goes back in time and prevents his parents from hooking up, then he ceases to exist. Well, in this case, you don't have the initiating event. You don't have the fires. This whole collapse scenario goes right out the window. So you would think with a government that serves the people, that doesn't have an agenda, they'd say, oops, we need to rework that. Considering this is a big part of 9/11, but they don't do that. And what we've done too is we've submitted a request for correction to them. They stood by it. We sued NIST, and the courts have come out and said, well, and again, they didn't even judge us on the merits of our evidence. They basically said that federal agency reports don't have to be scientifically accurate. As long as they meet the statutory requirements, they're under no obligation to be accurate in their reports, to have any verifiable facts, as long as they issue you a report. So me being a little rhetorical, I say, well, what's to prevent them from blowing their nose in a hanky and saying, there's your report, kid. Now leave me alone. So that's why we have the Scientific Integrity Act. We've written this. We're trying to get this passed in Congress that'll force government agencies to be scientifically accurate in these reports. But this is what we're up against. That's why I see this as a spiritual war, because it's like this big monolith monster that we're up against that just sort of protects itself. I mean, did you become like watching all of this unfold? What kind of effect did this have on you? Did this alter the course of your life like it did me and so many others, seeing how the media reacts, government and all of that?
Yeah, I almost killed myself, to be honest. I had a severe depressive break. I was an actor in Hollywood, and I was just living the dream. I was on my way up. I was going to be the next big Hollywood star. I had a manager from CBS. He's like, "You're going to be the next big Hollywood star." And I was doing YouTube videos. Everyone loved me. It was just manic and love and everything. And then I started to realize the military, what the power of the empire, essentially. I didn't understand at the time the British Empire, which rebranded in 1997 to become a United Kingdoms. The King of Kings, now Charles, the Xerxes, the King of Kings. He's still the Emperor, Charles. He's the Emperor. This is the British Empire, shattered the Japanese Empire, took over Japan with military bases, did the same thing to the German Reich, took it over with military bases. The British, it's not just British anymore. It's this military empire that's like American, I started to understand it, and it drove me literally insane. I started to lose friends. Then I went down the rabbit hole of like the biotech industry with Monsanto poisoning using like glyphosate on the crops, the drug industry patenting life and I started to get really twisted. And I was also doing a lot of drugs at the time, which probably intensified my twisting of my mind, but it was just a lot of pot. I was enhancing my curiosity, which, can spiral you into chaos. I went nuts, dude. I had to slow down and get traction again in life and find like a reason to live, because I felt like I was the bad guy. And how can you go on living as if you think like bad people will justify that they're the good guys just so that they can legitimately survive. I felt like I was the evil one supporting the destruction of the planet and the human race. And I've just had to kind of find like the good things in my life again, and helping my friends and my immediate surroundings. And like, I feel like paying taxes into this system is still supporting the empire. And also now I'm like, I can kind of see the value of utilitarian empire. Like it's like maybe it's the least bad thing. Like it's better than marauding psychopathic murderers. Like at least we don't have barbarian warlords that'll come gut your wife in the middle of the night because they can. Like we have laws and things at least. So it's not like the worst of the worst of the worst of all time. There's been much more horrible governments than what we have right now. But I think it could be better. Like I think this idea of conquest has kind of hit a head and maybe done. This time of like that we need to conquer other lands in order to pay for our inflation is like, it's not working in the Middle East anymore. And we've seen that the last 20 years. Our national debt is $35.18 trillion. It's gone up like 20% in the last 4 years or less. I don't know, $5 trillion. It's like out of control, or becoming out of control. With global currency now, the US dollar, like with Bitcoin and things like that, the US dollar is floundering. I think that diplomacy and trade maybe is the better way at this point. But I mean, how to convince the military? Like, I'm like, how do I convince the military industrial complex that building bombs and blowing up the Saudis or whoever the hell in the Middle East isn't the way now? I want to refocus them on like blowing up drones. Like, let's refocus all of our money and influence into drone defense programs so that we can still spend all the money on explosives, but blow up robots instead of blowing up humans. Maybe that will help.
Well, here's my plan, and I've talked about this on my podcast at one point. I have no intention to run for president. I would never do that to myself. I wouldn't win anyway. I'm a terrible politician. But take the military-industrial complex, because these companies are made up of people. Get rid of the people that are pushing this stuff. There's probably a lot of decent people at the lower levels just earning a paycheck there, and try to work with them to transition to something that's not needing a river of blood to keep it going, to like civilian space flight. How cool would that be if you could get on a rocket ship or whatever the technological name for it is, with your girlfriend on Friday and say, hey, let's go to Paris for the weekend. And it's like a 2-hour trip. You get a hotel, come back on Sunday, or you're ready for work on Monday morning. And this would revolutionize everything, trade, all of that. So transition all of that stuff over to, by the way, this is not an AE platform, folks. This is just something I've thought about in private moments. But transition into these things that could change the world, so that we don't need this constant war going on in order to keep these companies going and keep people employed. So that's just one of the things that I've thought. But yeah, you're right. This whole model is falling apart. I remember Ron Paul talking back when I started waking up to 9/11 Truth about how the dollar is going to crash, all of this stuff. And over the years, people have said, oh, Andy, that hasn't happened yet. That hasn't happened yet. But I mean, we're kind of watching it happen incrementally. You go to Dairy Queen, you pay $8 for a cup of ice cream. And I mean, the food prices are just insane right now. So, I mean, I think 9/11, if we had a revelation of this, of what really happened that day, I think it would put an instant halt to everything going on right now, even though it is 23 years later. What do you think?
You're right about resource distribution. That's the crux of the problem of why we're at conquest stage, because we need to get the resources so that we don't hyperinflate and that people don't revolt and try and overthrow the system so that they can get food. So they're like, we need external resources. We need to go get the oil. We need the poppies. We need the heroin, whatever the hell they're trying to sap out of the Middle East right now. And if we could somehow transmit the resources from point to point in a quick amount of time, we don't really need to take like the hydrogen revolution. We're on the cusp of a hydrogen fuel revolution right now. I just interviewed Jim Tour, who's like the leading scientist on Earth that studies graphene at Rice University. And graphene is this hexagonally latticed carbon. It's a two-dimensional layer of carbon that they figured out. It's like a honeycomb, but it's like one atom thick layer of sheet of carbon. And it's got electrical conductivity properties greater than copper. It's stronger than steel by weight, by 200 times. It's lighter than steel. It's much lighter than a lot of strong, and but it can capacitate energy like a battery. It's a fascinating, and it's pure carbon. You can get it out of carbon dioxide. You can actually turn carbon dioxide into this building material of graphene. You can take carbon trash, put it in a tube. They figured out this process called flash joule heating, where they hit it with 7,000 degree electricity. They pulse it like at a 0.1 millisecond pulsing. They pulse this carbon trash like plastic, turns it into graphene powder, bulk graphene powder. And for $4.50 worth of this graphene powder, you'll get a kilogram of hydrogen as a byproduct. So you're making money to create hydrogen. It used to cost money to make hydrogen. They figured out how to create a resource and get a hydrogen byproduct, which you can then use as a fuel, which you can pump through the current methane system that we have on Earth. That will reduce the cost of fuel by, I don't know, 100 times. It will make going to the gas station, instead of costing like $4.50 a gallon, it'll cost like 9 cents a gallon. Some crazy, which will reduce the cost of goods. And then what's going to happen is the carbon industry is going to freak out. They're going to be like, we still want to pump our oil and dig our coal. So we can turn the oil and the coal into graphene with the same process of flash joule heating. So we can drill more, we can mine more. I think it will really, the fear then would be that it's going to unleash free or cheap electricity for too many people, and that psychopaths will become too powerful. Like, there is a limitation on growth factor that the utilitarian industrialists are concerned with. They don't want to give people too much power too quickly because they'll potentially overgrow the system. So there is a concern of you still want to limit the power of the individual. I don't like the idea, but this is the idea of utilitarian control, is you can't let everyone have unlimited power because some idiot's going to drop a nuclear bomb on the ground and blow everything up. So they want to like sort of cap it out. But if we can reduce the cost of fuel, we've solved the economic crisis. That will get enough. Now we just need to be able to spread out, colonize, or the underwater, colonize Mars, colonize space stations and things like that, which we're really on the cusp of as well with space elevator. Like, we're about to build a space elevator with a graphene tether, and
that would be cool. That sounds like Star Trek stuff. And I mean, I know it's science fiction, but all scientific innovations start off as science fiction. There's an H.G. Wells story from whenever he was alive at the beginning of the 20th century or so, where they use a rocket to go to the moon. And, we use rockets to go into space now. So it always starts off as a thought in someone's head. This is the thing. Yeah, I mean, I see your point about unlimited growth and too much being available to people too soon. And I see this with the AI. I'm a little concerned about where that's going to take us, because it's like, I don't believe human beings should be able to have whatever they want at the tip of their fingers, have all of their wishes granted to them like a genie. I don't think that's good for the human spirit. You got to struggle a little bit. But at the same time, when you let people compete and make them more free, at least a little bit, you get better technology, you get other things. It kind of works itself out. I've just sort of seen this. And I've seen this with individuals too. If you're sitting there competing with other people and trying to, I don't know, take their piece of the pie or whatever, then you're constantly running on this hamster wheel. But if you just sort of focus on yourself and just do your own thing, then people just start copying what you're doing, because you become the leader of it. And I think the United States could do this. Now, with all the stuff that you're talking about, if we focused on our own development, our own technological innovation, we would be the prize of the world once again.
I think we also that we have to, as a national security defense risk, like if we don't, the Chinese will, and then they'll take over the earth. It's like we have to do it. We have to take control of this energy, this new fuel source of hydrogen. Immediately, we've got to be the ones first, because everyone's going to start doing it. They're going to start mining carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and turning it into graphene and get the hydrogen out of it. They'll get the hydrogen out of the methane, which you can turn methane with like steam methane into carbon dioxide, which then you can turn into graphene. So it is paramount that we move on this as a system. I don't know if we need it in the we need like political discourse around it, but we also need the industrial sector to work on it.
I think we need to let the kids play. I think when I say the kids, I mean like the citizens and stuff. When you're being a kid, you're out in the backyard and you're goofing off with your action figures and stuff. You might figure something out that's kind of clever, right? And that's how you learn, is by imagination and just sort of facing challenges and figuring them out. I think if you let the kids, the citizens, give them a little bit more freedom to innovate and compete, you're going to get better stuff. But what I see now is sort of like this anti-human direction. Like, for instance, you go over to the Circle K and the store clerk will be sitting there on their cell phone and they want you to scan your own stuff. And their goal ultimately, because I've read about this, is to have completely self-sufficient stores where you maybe just need an engineer to show up every once in a while to fix the machines. And so as we start taking human beings out of the equation and into the basic labor market jobs, like we can't sustain an economy with everybody being an entertainer on social media and stuff. What are you going to do with these people? And they're always going to exist, these people who kind of graduate from high school and don't go to college, but they get some job at the factory and they're okay for the rest of their lives. There's always going to be those people. What are we going to do with all of this unskilled labor pool once everything is automated? This scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, there's the view, I guess you call it utilitarian digital serfdom, where like you've got this pleb class of like 80 to 90% of the humans that just do grunt work and they get sent off to war. I think that's part of why war exists, is to shave off a segment of humanity that they believe is too stupid to actually contribute. And they call them consumers. I mean, they've normalized the phrase consumers, which is pretty terrifying in a lot of ways. But it's also kind of true. Like, humans are animals. We're animals like dogs, but we're just intelligent animals. We're very intelligent, frontal lobe development, but we're still animals. If we don't get food, we go crazy like a hungry dog. Like, desperate people are like crazed animals. They can become crazed animals. So I kind of get it. But it's like, do you want less people or do you want more people? Do you want, maybe it's not quite that simple. It's like, do you want less people that are plugged into machines where we're relying on automation? Because then if the power goes out, we're screwed. And they are working with tapping the vacuum for electricity, like a solid state vacuum drive. Nassim Harriman's working a lot on getting electricity out of the vacuum of space-time, which is coming around the bend. And they've been suppressing that kind of infinite energy tech. But I think now that they want the machine to always be on, like the AI to always be on, the electricity to always be on, I don't know who they is, but that they're willing to tend this concept of infinite unlimited electricity that's always on, so we're always plugged in. If that's the case, then it will be easier to automate the system and have people just constantly plugged into the machine. But then you've got like mass censorship. I mean, it'll be like hive mind control, which maybe that's the digital serfdom I'm talking about, where like you're not allowed to behave in certain ways or think certain things. That the read-write capacity of the neural net that Elon's building right now, it's a read-only system where it can just sense your brain waves and then transmit it to the machine like a cursor on the machine. But later it'll be a write mechanism where they can input data into your brain, and just like watching a commercial and being like, I think I want it. That product is like, your brain's going to be, So then there's going to be a sect of people that just want nothing to do with the machine, and they're going to try and just grow crops and live on their own. And then the digital kings will be like, we need to, they're risking the system. They might try to overthrow us. Like, I don't want it to come to some sort of great cyber war. I don't think it really needs to. If we can plan ahead, it shouldn't have to, because as long as we're able to spread out, I think as long as we're able to spread out and colonize first Mars and then the clouds of Venus, like the upper atmosphere of Venus, obviously space stations and stuff underwater. And I think we can build floating cities also, like with this, like a boat floats on the ocean. If you can create a structurally sound thing that's less dense than air, it will float like a balloon or a vacuum that will float in the air. And if it's big enough, it'll be able to support systems on top of it, and we'll be able to kind of float cities. Then you want them to be transparent so they don't block out sunlight and things like that.
Well, this is the kind of stuff that I would love to see. I mean, I don't know how close we are to something like that. I'll probably won't see anything like that in my lifetime, but this is the kind of stuff that we should be thinking about in our public. I mean, most people are sitting there talking about the latest movie or whatever, or focusing on, silly things out there, or getting caught up in the political divide or the drama or the war or whatever. But these are the kinds of brainstorming and imagination sessions that more people ought to be having, in my opinion. And I just kind of think, I don't know, maybe I'm too simple, but I just think that things kind of work out. Like in every society, you're going to have your artists, you're going to have your engineers who have no inclinations towards creativity whatsoever. You're going to have this type and that type, and they just sort of find each other and figure things out if they're given the breath to do that.
Yeah, the internet gives me a lot of hope for that reason. It's a great organizing tool. I've met so many geniuses with this technology. I'm glad I was around before the internet, like before the common internet in the 90s. Like I was born in 79, so I got to taste what life was like when you had to go to the library and search through the Dewey Decimal System to find like the things that had a K in it, and then you'd find what books had carotene, and then you could go search for the. But the reason I'm talking about this crazy, wild, sci-fi, potential future stuff is because I don't want a 9/11 to happen again. I don't know if we're ever going to figure out who did it, why they did it. I don't know if we'll ever truly find out. And to be honest, I don't really care. I don't want it to happen again. I don't want us to get false flagged into some freaking war where 100,000 people get their legs blown off and children don't have dads, and we get worse as a people because we've lost so much as a result of the chaos. I don't want that to happen again. So if we can figure out resource distribution and making things cheaper, I think that is the solution to a lack of need for conquest, which I think is the impetus for why 9/11 happened, is we needed a reason to go to war.
Yeah, exactly. Now, before we close out today, and I found out about this from Jeff, our marketing guy, you've got a social network. Now, one of the things we've covered in another interview with Zach Voorhees is internet censorship. And of course, that happens on social media too, but it's called minds.com. Tell us about that, and why do we need minds.com, and why should people sign up?
It's open source. This is the biggest reason. Is it's free software. It's built with AGPL3 code. There's other different licensing codes, but what's situation is, so okay, from the beginning, the First Amendment of the United States is in peril right now. Free speech is being threatened, and it's mostly being threatened by online censorship, as far as I can tell. People use these systems like they're in the commons, like your telephone. If Verizon could go in and make it so you said a word on the phone to your mom and they shut the phone call off, and then you no longer have access to your phone number, people would riot. I would hope they would riot, because that's not righteous. It violates the First Amendment. This is a material we use in the commons. These social networks should be treated the same way, in my opinion. The big ones, they're common utilities at this point. Everyday usage by most of the people on Earth. So the reason I feel like we can't legislate our First Amendment right and guarantee it. We have to take it by force. And by force, I mean, we need to create systems that are impervious to the threat. So we need systems that have free software and free speech built into them. And the way you do that is by controlling the access to the software code itself, not the networks, whatever. As long as you have the code, you can spin up a version of that network and then use it, and you get all the functions and tools of the utility. So AGPL3 code, like I was saying earlier, that Minds is built off of, or it's got other versions of open source code, is what's called a free software code license. It's the best version of open source you can find. Some open source code, a lot of it, you can take online, find it, change it, and make that change private, and then have your own proprietary, which is private code system. So, but with AGPL3, it's Afro General Public License 3, developed by Richard Stallman and the Free Software Foundation. Any changes you make to that open source code are free and open that people can see. They see all your changes to the code. So anytime a system comes in and tries to take that code and make it better for their own purposes, those betterments are available to the entire world, so that we keep compounding our changes on top of each other. We build an ever open system of code licensing. So YouTube, for instance, has a lot of proprietary code. Google has a lot of proprietary code. If that were to be opened, either legislatively opened or just someone built something as good as that or better, and then it was open, that someone gets a hold of that code, someone tries to run that system, and they do some crazy terms of service where you can't say the word fuck, for instance, or you can't say the word dog. People, that code, someone else is going to be like, well, I have that code. I'll make my own version of the website where you can say the word dog. And then the people, not only will those two networks be able to interoperate anyway, because they're built off of the same code. So YouTube 1, YouTube 2, 3, 4, 5, they all, I can be on YouTube 7 and subscribe to you if you're on YouTube 2. But if I'm on YouTube 2 and I get banned because I said the word dog, I can now go over to YouTube 7 and still have access to the same function. That's how you preserve your ability to speak on the internet, is by having access to the code. So I think that open source code and free software is so important to the preservation of the U.S. Constitution, particularly the First Amendment. And Minds is an example of that in working form.
Right. And I just want to clarify, it's MINDS, not Minds like a landmine or something. MINDS.com. Check that out. Ian, you're a fascinating guy to listen to. Maybe we got to have you back on my podcast at some point if you'll do us the honor. But thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so good to be able to talk about some of these things, kind of go out of our usual topics, which is usually 9/11 and all the science and stuff, because there's a whole world out there and a whole future waiting for us beyond all of this drama going on right now.
It's holistic. I like zooming out when there's a problem to see the surrounding parts, because nothing exists in a vacuum. There are no closed systems. Every problem has a surrounding reason that problem exists. And things like 9/11 didn't happen on its own. Like, there were many, many reasons why. So when you can kind of figure out about resource distribution and why governments and organizations want to take people to war and why they're willing to kill and lie to get that happening, like, then you can start to solve the problem. So I'm happy that you let me expound. That was really cool.
Yeah, awesome. Well, you're going to be doing it more probably on my show Free Fall. So thank you so much for joining us on the 24th hour.
Thanks, man.